So welcome to the 3 extra ingredients needed to attain true CD. So if you're in this session, hopefully you're already on your journey to transformation. But as you know, it's a lot more than just people, process, and tools. And so in this session, we're going to kind of go over some of the other ways that you can transform and get to that endpoint. We'll be covering accepting an x-modal service model. We'll be covering architecting for the business and developing a prescriptive journey or prescriptive CD acceleration. Right now, we'll start with accepting an x-modal service model. Oh, yeah, it work. So let's just talk like kind of baseline here, talk about what we mean when we talk about service model. So we're really just talking about the way in which, on cue, right? So we're really just saying who is supporting the platform, right? And when we're talking about it in this session, I'm talking about it very generally, right? So maybe who supports the infrastructure, the configuration, the platform, the changes, best practice. So we'll kind of make it more of a broad statement. And then let's just get kind of terminology. When we talk about a snowflake environment, we're talking about a developer-managed environment that's unique, environment is that it's not configured the same as others. When we're talking about shared and central, so you could call shared model one thing and central a little bit different, right? So shared could be a shared platform, and central could mean just the centralization of the administrative burden. And we'll kind of get into that a little more. But as you know, even just from Sasha's session this morning, most companies, as you embark on this journey to transform, to get to that state of true CD, you're always having to balance the ability to provide developers flexibility and control, yet keep compliance and standards, right? And so how do you have that balance in your service model? So who maintains the environment? Who maintains the best practice? So that's kind of what we're gonna cover. I think if you think about it in the same terms as if you're doing kind of your financial planning, you might want to, obviously everybody wants to make as much money as possible, but you have to also mitigate the risk. So the more risk you take, the higher reward usually, and the less risk you take, usually the lower reward. So you want to find, when you're younger, maybe you want to have high risk, right? And as you get towards retirement, you go to lower risk. So it's kind of, with financial, it's about finding what's your balance, right? What's the most important thing to you? How much speed and agility, how much flexibility can you give up for compliance? And do you need to? Is there a way to do both, right? Is there a way to have both? Because ultimately, both for financial investments and also for CD, you would want both, right? You would always want the most of flexibility and speed and the most of compliance and control, but they always seem to be at the opposite ends of the scale, right? So if you build it, will they come? So to kind of give you a background on how Martha and I came to speak here. We had to actually give our session, present it just like everybody else, kind of submit it for review and be accepted. Martha and I, in the past 2 years, collectively have spoken with, in our positions at CloudBees, have spoken with over 200 customers, all like in-depth conversations about kind of where they are in their CD journey and where they're going. And so it's kind of a cool position because we're able to see so many similarities between companies. So we're able over the past couple of years to even see a change in what were companies doing in 2017 that they're doing differently now. So we're in a kind of, and we wanted to share that, and that's all. So this is kind of going to be very high level. We'd like it to be a little bit interactive and casual, but it's really us, Martha and I, kind of saying, let me see if we can net it out and share with you some of the challenges that other companies your size are having. So some of the biggest companies in the So if you build it, they will come. That they is developers. Okay. Yeah. So in 2017, when I joined CloudBees and I had the opportunity to speak with a lot of companies, most companies were kind of on the path of fixing their snowflakes, right? So they already had a lot of developers that had pulled down environments, were already starting their own path without shared service. And so they thought, okay, let's get this under control. Let's put in some compliance, right? Because it's not okay that our business critical applications are being run by all of these snowflakes, right? Not supported, not centrally managed. We don't actually have any insight. And a lot of companies are still there. So as they embarked on this journey, they said, let's build a shared service platform, right? So how many are kind of feeling that? Let's build a shared service platform, because if we build it, surely the developers will want to come, because what developer wants to manage their own environment? What developer wants to have to do backups and updates, right? So anybody kind of feel that? Anybody kind of pass that if they build it? If I build it, they will come? Do you guys know what I say when I, right? And so my question to you is, did they? Did they all join up? Did developers come running to that shared service platform? And if they didn't, why, right? So what we found was we took kind of a survey of hundreds of customers that we had talked to, prospects and customers, right? Across the globe, big companies, small companies. Their current situation was they were shared service. We built this shared service, and this is where we want our developers to be. Right, but we asked them, how's it going for you? And they almost all of them, 76% of them said, not too good, not too good. Mostly the ones that said not too good were the ones that didn't have the leverage, either technically or politically or process-wise, or they didn't have a strong enough platform. They didn't really have the leverage to force developers on. The ones that were able to force developers, well, they a lot of times said they were okay. So the current model was they were shared service, but so many of them said this is not good enough, right? Developers are not joining, so we need something better. Why? So some of the pitfalls of the shared service that a lot of these companies were having is they created a monolith, right? In developing a shared service, they're saying, you know, we want the ability to have compliance, to have templates, to code reuse. All these things are good things, right? But if you do it on a shared platform, what ended up happening was, you know, they would force the beginning of the developers to come, and then the teams would catch wind of the fact that if they came onto this platform, they would have no control. They were going to be on a monolith. The performance was going to be lower. If it went down, they literally would have no control. So they're going from this environment where they control everything, right? From soup to nuts. Like if it goes down, it's on them, but it's not going down because I haven't upgraded Jenkins since like 2014, right? So anyway, so this was interesting. We saw that although, you know, companies were on the path to building a shared service, even in the infancy stages of building their shared service, they knew that developers needed more. And so a little bit of what I'm talking about with an x-modal shared service is that, look, you don't have to necessarily say, we're shared service. No, we're going to let it be snowflake. Consider having multiple modes of service models depending on the needs of your developers, right? Because ultimately, like, think about what Sasha said this morning. We all know that if you give developers the creativity and the power, the throughput will be bigger, right? But we also know if you give them rope, you know, they will hang themselves because, you know, we have talked to developers who have maybe one user access that they all share, right? So security. We've talked to development teams in large companies that are in Snowflake that haven't updated literally in 5 years because they get superstitious. So that's not good. Anyway, so let's talk. We talked about Snowflake. I talked about the difference between central and shared. And what I'm trying to show here is shared means kind of you're sharing the infrastructure, you're sharing the platform. There are different levels of sharing. right? If you do central management or centralized, you can still kind of break out different sections depending on the tech needs, and also give a container where you're sharing the load of the administrative burden. But then you introduce something called federated. And what federated means is that underlying, you have a shared service or a central management team that's in charge of or responsible for the low-level infrastructure and platform, but each development team can maybe have their own snowflake within that environment. So breaking it down, you can have it a lot of different ways, but one way to do it would be central management provides the platform, and through containerization, each development team has their own area, or each application, or each tech stack, right? And so the central management team creates the foundation, maybe creates the best practice. I mean, you guys have to define it the way you want to, but then leaves a little room for configuration on the top. Leaves a little room for developers to do their own customization. And so what happens is it's kind of allowing for a little bit of the best of both worlds. So in 2017, this kind of shows that, you know, when you develop this shared or central platform, or when we saw companies kind of embark on this journey, the adoption rate was low. So as we talk to customers and we talk to them about how's it going, where do you want to be? Okay, you have 2 teams, but there are 500 teams. You have 2 teams on shared, but there are 500 teams. And companies would say to us, well, maybe you guys can help us evangelize, right? Maybe evangelization is not the way to go, right? Maybe you need to think about the developers, right? And why are they not adopting? So as you added a federated model, and what, like I think federated model, like I said, you can have it in a lot of different ways. As you added a federated model, what would happen is teams that thought they were so unique that they needed their own stuff, teams that thought that they couldn't go onto a shared model because they need their own plugins, they have this special widget over here, they do stuff differently, right? They actually migrated, right, surprisingly, because once they knew that the only thing they were giving up was administrative burden at the very lowest level, but they could still have all the control, they could still be isolated from other teams, right? Once they knew that, then they were kind of like, well, maybe I'll give it a shot, right? And so what else also happened is teams that were on the shared model, the model that was the Franken-Jenkins, said, where do I sign up to get the heck off of this, right? And so they also migrate to federated. And so we haven't seen a ton of companies like kind of at the point where they're saying, all right, federation, right there. I would say the percentage is much higher of companies that have gone, they're sitting in the Frankenstein world, right? They're sitting in the shared. But once they get the kind of, so if I don't kind of, you know, tell you anything, or if you don't take anything away from this, what I would take away from this is that a lot of times when you're embarking on the journey of figuring out your service model, you get a little bit, companies get a little bit mirrored down in the, let me calculate the hours of how long it takes to maintain Jenkins, and let me quantify what will I save, you know, development teams if I'm able to centralize that. And it's almost kind of missing the point, because the point is, if you give developers freedom, they can impact the velocity with which they develop features, right? And that, the ability to develop features faster, the money that you gain on the business side in giving developers the flexibility to deliver faster is going to outweigh any administrative overhead that you save in sitting in shared. Because obviously, sitting in shared is cheaper. It's going to be cheaper infrastructure-wise. It's going to be cheaper because you're sharing your administrative burden, right? And sitting in Snowflake is going to be more expensive because who wants developers administrating Jenkins, right? So if you think that federated is not the answer answer is, what percentage of each of these do you need? And how can you set it up that they're to win-win? Because look, you guys know there are some development teams that don't need to be snowflaked, right? They want to say, I don't even want to know what you're using. I don't even know what Jenkins is, and I surely don't want to be an administrator, right? So just give me the keys, make it be turnkey, and I'll get on board. And then other development teams are sitting here, and there's no right answer. But as a company, you have to recognize that if you want to get there, you have to realize that you have to provide the ability to kind of service in each of these categories. Does that kind of make sense? Is anybody kind of in the stage where you've kind of built your shared and now you're moving to federated through maybe containerization? You are? Yep. You just started that, or you've been?
No, we were a startup. Then we got acquired by somebody big. They were all shared. We revolted, so now we're going.
When you say you revolted, was that developers?
Yes.
Yeah, right? Okay, thanks for sharing. So here's kind of a look at where we see service models heading from kind of 2016, where the majority kind of were snowflakes. So if you follow the turquoise line, that's your snowflakes, right? And you would agree that the ultimate goal is to get rid of the snowflakes, right? Because it's not a way to deliver enterprise software, both for security, for compliance, for reuse. So as we added shared service in 2017, what they found is kind of what I just said on the slides before. It really didn't affect the number of snowflakes much, which was the big surprise that companies had, right? And then, so now in 2018, we are seeing a lot more companies through containerization. As it became easier to manage multiple environments, as easy, so maybe manage 25 environments, as easy as it would be to manage one, that's when you can start thinking about federation. You can't do federation if it takes you 25 times longer to manage a platform, 25 platforms as it does to manage one, right? So things like configuration as code, things like containerization, and things like what CloudBees offers, a gateway or a platform to manage multiple platforms all within one visual. So as you can do that, then you get the ability to do federated. And I had to plug CloudBees, right, guys? Come on. I went a whole 10 minutes, I think. So, but then let's look out towards 2020. What we see is that as you increase in the federation, you're going to decrease in the snowflake, and eventually I think you're going to settle on companies where there'll be like a 50-50 shared federation with a super low number of snowflakes. So, I mean, we're not fortune tellers here, but we'll come back next year, see if I was right. And then lastly, how do changes in the service model affect the operational costs or administrative burden? So I'm brought in as a business value consultant to do these types of calculations, right? Okay, everyone, what's the return on investment if we go with this tool? What's the return on investment if we switch to this model? And certainly, right, if you are sitting in flexibility and speed, it's more expensive, right? And if you go to central managed, it's cheaper. But that doesn't mean you should do it, right? As we showed with the shared service, because in the end, and I think this is going to tee up the next speaker really well, yes, we can calculate this, right? We can calculate how you change your service model and how that affects the administrative burden. You don't want developers doing administrative tasks. That's the bottom line. They're expensive, right? You want to share that burden as much as possible. But I think more importantly, I don't think it's a good, this is a good exercise, but what's a better exercise is understanding if you empower your developers, if you give them the means to go faster, what is that going to do to the downstream business? How's that going to affect your mean time to recovery? How's that going to affect your change failure rate? How's that going to affect what's the downstream business effect of the upstream changes? More important. So next, architecting for the business. I kind of just teed Kathy up. So.
Great. So this is the second ingredient that we've been talking about. And a lot of times when you're implementing CI/CD, there's an opportunity to actually measure the effect on the business. But a lot of times that's not done. And so who works in like an organization that has many multiple teams that don't necessarily talk to each other, right? And so everyone's scrambling for resources, and they're trying to optimize what's best for their team. But unfortunately, they may make an optimization for that team that does not necessarily equate to an optimal result for the business. And so what we're trying to do here is take the business's response and that feedback back into the whole cycle. So when they're given a choice between, hey, let's just do this thing, or let's modify it a little and make it better for more teams, you actually pay the upfront cost earlier on so that you make that benefit available to the business as well. And so, most companies use either KPIs or OKRs, whatever it is. It's extremely important that the development team and the ops team and the business, that they're all aligned and that they all know what they're looking for, and there's that feedback cycle. All right. But what's interesting is that sometimes being able to do a little bit more and be able to be a little bit more efficient and be able to have developers actually produce more features, it actually results in huge business gains. And so it's extremely important to measure that. So I used to be a product manager in my previous life. And so I would be given a small team, and I would go through all the different RFEs. You'd get 100, and you optimize it down to okay, this month we want to do these 10. But the engineering manager would come back to you and say, we only have time to do these 7. And so I pick and choose which are my favorites, which are the ones that my sales rep says, this has to go for this $1 million deal. And I give them the 7, and they go off and produce the code, and it gets shipped. And great, it gave us, the business, a benefit of 0.2%, right? And it actually led to a retention rate of 0.2%, and that equated in business terms to about $700K of value. That's great. But what if we had actually optimized our CI/CD processes so that we could get all 10 features included? Right? What would that mean to the business at that point? And so in this scenario that we're talking about, the shopping cart, et cetera, it actually led to an additional 0.05% increase. And as a result, the business actually gained a value of about $900K for this just one application. But most large enterprises, they don't just have one application in one business. They usually have multiple. There we go. They have multiple. And so imagine all the different product owners, instead of having to optimize for their 7 features, they're able to get their 10 each month, and they're able to, again, be agile and continuously evolve. They're able to get all their 10 features. It could lead up to $1 billion of extra value to a company each year. And it's all about being able to not just look at optimizing for one small segment of a group, but being able to look at how do you get the CI/CD process optimized for the entire company. And that means that you're able to support developers in the different tools that they need, so that they're not just doing snowflakes, but they're being supported in a federated model. And so I think from this point, we're actually, and a lot of this is talking about, okay, let's just go and use this tool or go and use this process. But we know that in order for us to be able to deliver on that, it's actually a combination of these 3 things. And so I'm going to...
I'll just add to that one of the things we do at CloudBees, and this is not a pitch, one of the things we did is, I'm in the business value consulting division, and we were always quantifying these efficiency gains. What's the efficiency gain if you go to automation? What's the efficiency gain if you use this tool over that tool? And we started saying, let's kind of dig in with some of these bigger customers and say, forget the efficiency gain for a minute. Let us help you quantify the business gain. And they'd say, that's a good idea. Right? And so, but it was hard. It was hard to do at first because people we're talking to in shared services, they don't have insight to the business. They don't know how the change over here affects the revenue over here. It's hard to make that connection. So one of the ways that we were able to do that for some of the companies and really actually get the numbers, those exact numbers saying, if I increase my feature set by 25%, what does that do for my customer retention? What we did is we said, let's start with one application and let's run it from start to finish. Because the business people have the metrics, right? So you have, so that's what we did. We met with the business people all the way down to the developers, and we figured it out, right? We figured out what's the current rate and what would happen if you were able to multiply it by, get more features out. Anyway, so that's a suggestion that it is calculatable. It is worth calculating, right? Because I think it's the better story, not, over the efficiency gain. Did you have a question?
I was wondering, like, quantifying it, and any of you have an equation that you usually use, and then specifically, like, organizational size, are there multiplier effects, or like the example Jeff mentioned, being acquired, and there's a difference between applying CI/CD in a very small org versus a large one. Is it linear, like a 10x type of thing, or is it just varies?
I think what we found was if there was a general model, we would have created it.
Okay.
That's what my team does. We didn't find that it was generic enough that we could create this model that you guys could all go back. But what we did find was it wasn't as hard an exercise as you would think, right? But certainly nobody we've talked to has been able to make that connection. I think it's more about just getting the idea that, so some of the things you can affect measurement on, like the mean time to recovery, the failure rate, like those small, those types of things, those are things you should and can start quantifying now. Those are things that are standard. I think in the Devops 2017 State of Devops report, they kind of put those in for industry metrics, start calculating those. But I think, no, I don't know of an equation that gets you from here to there.
Okay, for all 200.
Other than it's easier than you think, and I don't have a general knowledge for what's the exponential. If you have disparate groups and you're bringing them together. It's so unique. Every customer is so unique.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I wish I had the answer. I'll make my job easier. So Martha is going to go on to developing a prescriptive CD.
I think yeah, great. I didn't know how close to have it. All right, so let's talk about developing this, accelerating your CD by developing a prescriptive journey, right? So what, let's start here. How many of you right now are doing DevOps? Perfect. Of those of you that are doing DevOps, how many of you feel that you guys are all doing it the same way? Right. Perfect. So what I've learned over the last couple of years in talking to customers is that there is no right way to do DevOps. There are many ways to do DevOps. There could be a few ways that are the right way for your organization to do DevOps. And the other thing that we hear is that, or that we know, is that the tech is moving so fast that organizations are not taking the time, or they just don't have the time, naturally, to even look and understand what their desired state looks like. Okay, and if you look at anything, right? If you're building a house, you're not going to start breaking ground and doing, start building without knowing where you're going with this home, right? So you wouldn't want to do the same thing here. That's just the way that is. But so as a result, what happens is the path is then is what defines the destination instead of that desired state defining which path you choose. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because these paths start with your current state and an understanding of what your current state is and what that desired state is. All right, so here we'll start with a couple of why people are on the wrong path, or why those wrong paths are chosen. Not going to read those to you. You guys are all capable of doing that. But if you even look at the game of Frogger here, you have two different type of players. There's going to be the strategic player that's moving towards that goal, and then there are going to be the players like the way I play Frogger, which is just trying to run away from something. I'm running away from that car. I'm just darting. That's not the, the ideal player that you want to be in this space. So delivering outcomes through the prescriptive journey here, again, you're gonna want to start here with that current state. You need to assess it. You need to define then that desired state. Like anything else, there are going to be items that are must-haves. There are going to be items that are nice to have, but you need to know what those are, and it's okay. The process does not end here. So just because you know what your current state looks like and where you're going with it, that doesn't mean that once you get to that desired state that you're done. You're going to kind of sit here in this people, process, and technology, the methodology and approach area, and you're going to iterate and then reiterate, and you're going to continue to redefine that desired state. So here we have the 3 phases of this prescriptive CD journey, and that's the established, the operationalize, and the mature stage. The established stage here is going to be your who, what, when, who, what, when, and where, right? So who do you need to enable? Who do you need to be on this journey with you? Where you're going? When do you want to be there? And what that path looks like. And then documentation is going to be key here. You're going to want to document what you're currently using or doing, and how this is going to fit into your overall CI/CD journey, your desired state. Then the second phase here, the operationalize stage, is where you're going to be framing the structure. This structure that you frame is going to foster and enable the change that will support your ongoing CI/CD initiatives and practices throughout your organization. Step 3, your mature stage, that's going to be your steady state, right? Where you can, but in that state, just because you, again, I'm going to keep saying this over and over again because this is a key point here. You're not done. You get here, you're in your steady state, but then you're going to continue to refine, review, improve. You're going to, evolve. Everything is going to continue to move because you just can't afford to be stagnant. Right? So what happens when you don't have the process phases outlined, defined, and you're not using them to the way they should be used? You could encounter any of these problems, right? But a way to avoid these pitfalls that you see here, that many people run into, and is you spend that time back at that established stage, that first stage, that where you're defining, where you're documenting. That is going to keep you on your path. It's going to help you develop that plan. It's going to help you. You're going to know your goals. You're going to set your sights on your end game, your destination, the desired state. You're going to want to get buy-in, right, across the organization. You can't do this alone. This is not, it takes a village. Everyone has to be bought into this. Otherwise, this process won't work. You're going to empower and enable your teams. Once you identify who those right people are, the people that you need to get you on this journey and get you to where you want to be, you want to empower and enable them. And then you're going to leverage people, right, that are doing the same, that are on that same path. They might be using some of the same tools. People like you, and that is, this where we are today and tomorrow, this is exactly what that's for. This is to meet people, to network, to talk about where you are, your struggles, your challenges, and where you'd like to be, and find out how they're doing it. And then maybe that works for you, and maybe it doesn't, and maybe you can iterate on their path and make your own. It's on you?
Key takeaways. So I'll just add to, I think a lot of what Martha covered are yeah, of course, right? Of course, we would plan before we do anything. But right? But Martha does talk to hundreds of customers that are in a state of, they get something like containers come out. We got to do containers. We have got to do AWS. We got to do That's what she's talking about, the path letting you define the destination, right? Because Kubernetes, cloud, all these things are to solve a challenge to get you to CD, right? And maybe you have the challenge and maybe you don't. But if you don't know what you're solving for, if you don't pay attention to the end, that's what she's talking about, being prescriptive, right? Understanding the end game. It's not just like have a project plan. A lot of people they just go crazy. They just say, oh, we gotta do containers, it's the latest thing. And they just go down that path. And then they realize maybe that wasn't the right path for them. So, yeah, so the key takeaways. So what's the point? 8 minutes? Okay. So the point, we were just gonna kind of, we'll pass that summarization. So, because we only have 8 minutes left, I want to leave it open. So first question is, what is true CD? When we put in this title for this, the 3 extra ingredients to attain true CD, we had a lot of emails. What's true CD? It must be a new Gartner, term, right? Like, what's the acronym, Buffy? And so I asked you guys, what the acronym is? Do you guys know, are you familiar with true CD? Raise your hands, I'm not gonna call on you. Yeah, obviously. I mean, true CD, the answer is it's whatever your path is, right? It's about defining your path to CD, right? Not just kind of going willy-nilly, not just picking the latest tech. It's understanding your destination and making a prescriptive journey to that destination. It's about understanding that there's not one size fits all when you talk about service models. And so, I think we were gonna close it out by saying, like, you're all in this journey together, right? If you're here with thousands of people that are on the same journey, make use of the time, right? Leverage the people, leverage the colleagues, leverage the partners. These are people that have talked to many customers and maybe can bootstrap you, right? Can get you there a little bit faster. And obviously leverage CloudBees. We are the Jenkins experts. We have the largest number of Jenkins experts, certified Jenkins experts in our staff, right? Sorry, I couldn't not. So as you embark on your journey to true CD, we say just don't do it alone, right? Don't do DevOps alone. You don't need to, right? People have made the same mistakes that you're sitting on right now or you're headed towards. So talk to people and leverage them. So we were going to leave it open 5 minutes. We were supposed to leave 15 minutes for questions, but Martha talks a lot. Are there any questions?
I'm still a little confused at the federated service model. So in my organization, I consider it a central service model because we have our group manages the pipeline. We've made it pretty much self-service. You can choose a container image, but that's in certain parameters. But is that considered central then?
So it just depends. I think we would consider it federated if you allow your developers to make changes to their environment, right? Does each developer have their own little space? Is there isolation for, not developer, but is there isolation around teams or applications such that they have a layer where they can do their own maybe configuration?
Not
where
with
they can add their own plugins.
Pipeline, no.
So it's not the method for all companies, right? Some companies say we literally cannot have federated. We cannot have developers have any freedom. And then you sit in central, and there's nothing wrong with sitting in central, right? Because you're still driving best practice,
Okay.
right? But
Yeah,
like in the way I'm talking about it, I'm kind of pulling in a little bit of old database terminology for it, right? Because I don't think I necessarily read people talking about CD platform in federated specifically, right? So I'm kind of making a little bit of a leap here. Mm-hmm. So I am talking about the ability to have development teams have a little bit of their own flexibility and control in the configuration. So you might look at it layered, like the OS, then the platform, then the config, then maybe the templates, or maybe they're upside down. And if you have this top layer where developers can change or teams can change the top, that would be more federated.
Okay, thank you.
But I mean, I don't have to be right. I'm not the person to talk about this. It's to give you ideas of different ways. Because I've talked to customers that say, you know, oh, we don't call that federated. We call that whatever, you know. But
I mean, they can install Jenkins and play with it and make suggestions, but they can't deploy to production with their own Snowflake.
and I mean, I think if it's a corporate standard that they can't, then that's fine. Then you've created the right environment, right? So then I think then you look at the other thing. What is it that's hindering the developers? What would make them faster? Would it make them faster to have, you know, to be able to spin these up more? What, you know, is there anything that's impeding them? In your central managed model, is there a performance problem? Right? We see that's a huge thing I see all the time talking to customers is the performance issue when they go onto central. They say, when I was doing it by myself, my job's finished in 2 seconds, and now I'm waiting, you know, now I'm waiting 2 hours, and I don't know where my job is. And so I would say, look at your job in creating this is to free the developer to create. So make sure whatever you're creating doesn't impede the developer, and they'll tell you where the impediment is. People don't want to always listen, but they'll tell you where it is. Does that make sense?
Sorry, I just wanted to comment on what we're doing at Broadridge, which is a little bit towards that model. You know, we actually allow developers to we have a sandbox area so that they actually have access to be able to go in and experiment. They bring their own build servers, and they can actually then use those build servers to be able to have that flexibility, but we then promote pipelines and workflows up through a controlled hierarchy. So, you know, we can't allow developers to have push access to production. So you can have some of that, you know, mixed in between there. So that transformational model of giving developers flexibility, because they do need that, but we still need, you know, audit controls and all the other pieces associated with pushing code into production.
So when you do that model, I'm just curious, you would have to be able to have something like configuration as code to be able to mimic the development environment, then to mimic the production or the deploy environment, right? Would you agree?
Separate build from deploy. So the build side of things is they build artifacts, they push to Nexus, we use Nexus then to pull those artifacts and do the deploy process, which is a repetition of what they've done in dev, but we don't obviously rebuild on the production side of things. We're just pulling the artifact.
Gotcha. Anybody else want to share? Is anybody else doing some form of federated service model?
So when we were a startup, we had like 200 people. We were snowflakes, but we moved at like extreme speed. And you find yourself like scheduling a release around like the one guy that he has to be there, and that was always a problem. When we were acquired, we had to move data centers, so we moved from San Jose out to the East Coast. And they moved our data center primarily because they were a different organization, and they were, you know, very shared service-ish.
Right.
So at some point, we had to move into this shared service organization, and we had a catastrophic event, which basically meant our stuff simply did not work in their environment. So then we moved to federated. So now they're bringing in OpenShift. We're containerizing our apps, and we're now allowed to at least put configuration as code, where in our old data center, we go to production and tweak it. In their data center, we could not touch a thing. We couldn't even see anything. So we were really hamstrung. So your 2-hour wait, ours is like 2 weeks.
Whoa.
We're just trying to deploy. And we had contractors, we wasted money because nobody was moving.
For some companies, and it sounds like you kind of shifted from shared to central, right? Where shared meaning, look, it's all or nothing. You're all on the same thing. If you want a plugin installed, we're all going to have the same plugin. And shifting to more central, which is saying, look, we'll have like a different environment, shared environment, depending on your tech stack. And that's often enough of a shift. And it sounds like that's the kind of shift you guys made, right?
But I think a lot of these companies are still under like SOX compliance, so there's separation of duties. You can't simply just dump stuff out there, which is good.
And that's where central might come in.
As a startup, it's awesome.
Where you don't, where you give the isolation or security through isolation, and maybe you have a lot of the same environments spun up, all centrally managed, right? But they're all the same. That's kind of the difference between the federated and the central. But central definitely is pretty powerful, especially if you're sitting in a shared monolith, right? And you can't even do central in a good way, meaning spin up a bunch of the same things if you don't have a way to manage multiple. And that's where new tech comes in, right, to solve that challenge. But thanks for sharing that.
All right, I hate to cut it off, but I'm going to cut it off, just because we have another group in. So Buffy, Kathy, Martha,
Thank you all for your participation.